similar? Always it's about stealing the money. Even when Alexander the Great took over the Middle East, according to the Gemara in Chelek, they came back to the Egyptians and said, we want our money back. Because it was in Alexandria that he had his court. He goes, the Jews owe us money. Do you know that recently Iran said they wanted reparations for the people that Mordechai and Esther killed? I'm not joking. This was real.
This is real.
They said, yeah, the Jews owe us because they murdered all these people. We want reparations.
The Egyptians just said that also recently.
Recently they said
They
it?
did. There's a lawyer that's making a case for that.
Yeah, reparations are in. Reparations are in. So what was the answer? Gavia ben Psisa, who was a humble man, he was actually a hoika, a hunchback. So he wasn't a very impressive, figure. Like the least of the Jews in terms of in his brilliance. He was more brilliant, but he was very Nebi looking. He says, let me go and represent you to Alexander the Great's court, which was basically The Hague. Let's face it, it was the International Criminal Court. It really was. He says, how am I going to speak about this claim to the whole world? Let me go. If they beat me, they'll say, you can say, he wasn't our best guy. We'll send you a real lawyer. So he said, and if I win, I win. So he went and he said, sure, we'll pay you reparations, but at the same time, you have to pay us wages for 600,000 workers for 210 years. So you set up an account with us, and we'll pay you for what we owe you. And that was the answer. And they said, give us time to think about it, and they never came back. That's the kind of people, those are the kind of voices that we need. Very hard. So when you take a vow, it is to, I'm going to suggest here, putting these together, what it does is make sure that you're Kodesh Lashem, meaning you're not going to be tricked because of personal interest. You're not going to go into this war with a personal interest, because if you do, you will likely fail. Now you understand why when Yehoshua conducts the very first war, which is against who? Yericho, the entrance point of Eretz Yisrael. You want to go to Eretz Yisrael? What did one guy do? Who was that guy? What was his name? Achan. And what did he take for himself? Nothing. He took a few gold coins and a nice suit. He got one of those fancy. What's the fancy suit today? I don't even know anymore. We used to go to Barney's and get a very fancy suit. What's the most expensive suit today? Armani? I don't know. Yeah, so he took a $3,000 suit, and who cares? No, it was a spectacle that they stoned him to death in a public gathering. You know why? Because you're not going to win Eretz Yisrael if you have personal interest. We've got zero tolerance for personal interest. If you're Kodesh Lashem, we'll win. If you have a self-interest, we will be slaughtered. We're not only not going to win, but we'll be beaten terribly. You have to be able, when you go into Eretz Yisrael, to withstand the temptation. The temptations. You have to have control of your Yetzer and all of its fantasies, because then, and where do you put it? Right here? Kodesh Lashem. That's why I want to suggest this is where the Nedarim was, and it's not my suggestion. The Baal Turim says it beferish. The Baal Turim says beferish that you go into a war, you take a neder. What neder? So I'm going to say, since the central instrument of this war was the tzitz, it was what they used to defeat Bilam and the kings. It's what they used to carry out to the letter of the law, killing the women that they needed to kill. It was the key to rooting everything out. It means that they had terrible temptation. And they had to make sure that if they're going to go into the war, they won't be tempted to do what? To do what Zimri did, to fall. The women of Midian and the advice of Bilam was to entice them and say, wonderful Jewish people, we would love to be part of you. I'm interested. Teach me Torah. Take me into your home. I'm one of the good ones. Let me live. But the intention is so mixed. No, unless I'm following Moshe's instructions, I will not have the moral power and authority to do what this was a gruesome act. Because my morals will be questioned. And they'll say to us, evil Jews, why do you hurt small children, terrible children, you murderers of children? Isn't that what everybody says about Israel? There's two things that they say, and so we're getting really tired already. Either we're Nazis, or we're child murderers. Take your pick. or worse. But those are the two slanders. War criminals, violators of international law. These are the words that are thrown at us by the Amaleks, the Lavans, and the villains of the world. And we got to be very morally clear, hence the tzitz. You want to kill those 3-year-old girls? You better pass the tzitz right by them so you have the moral clarity that this is what you're supposed to
You
do.
said they
So that's
died.
what-
Because if you make one mistake, what are they going to call you? Murderers. It's incredible.
That's what
They
Pinchas
were
had to
killed
do.
with the tzitz.
Oh, and Pinchas had to lead it. Why? Go ahead, say.
Because he was able to do that.
He was able to do that.
Totally
No,
fair.
okay, thank you. So now let's go back to Moshe Rabbeinu for a second.
Did you say they were killed with the tzitz?
What?
Did you say they were killed with that tzitz?
They were brought down from the air. They took their escape.
I
They
mean,
tried
the
to
children,
escape.
how were they?
No, oh no, Rashi says in figures that they passed. It was a scan, and they could tell by the color of her face whether she was mature enough to have relations. That's all. Once she was mature
And how
enough,
did they die? How did they get killed?
well, be killed with a sword.
Oh, with the sword? I
Yeah.
thought you said the tzitz.
No, the tzitz identified them.
Identified them,
The
okay.
moral clarity of Kodesh Hashem. I think this is such a. When I was learning this for this shiur, I don't know. Sometimes you prepare shiur, and sometimes you say, "Wow, I really can learn something for myself." I think that message, especially in the 3 weeks, is not no. You're not going to be in Eretz Yisrael successfully if you have. You just have to be Kodesh Hashem. Be on board with Hashem's agenda, and that's how you're going to make it through. What are you going to do with your life? I'm going to do what Hashem's will. I'm going to do. I want to be in Eretz Hashem. I want to do what Hashem. What does that do today? I got daven, I got learn, I got do chesed, I got do mitzvahs. Okay, I'm busy. Otherwise, you sit down and say, where am I going today? What am I doing today? What am I eating today? I don't feel my ego is satisfied today. I'm bored. But if you're working for somebody, and there's a lot of work to do, you just get to work. Don't think about it so much. You got a job to do. Just do your job. Do your job. So let's go back to Moshe for a second. Moshe was. People were crying. Why were they crying during the whole thing of Zimri?
Because
They
they
know-
Behema Bochim. What were they crying
They didn't
about?
want Moshe to die.
No, not
Think
that.
of Zimri.
No, when Zimri marries Cosby in a public ceremony,
Oh.
as we said last week, he says, "I'm converting her. You converted your wives. Stop this craziness. Your court, Moshe Rabbeinu, that Hashem told you to kill 157,200, like we said last week, cannot proceed. It was a court challenge, and he won. It was an appeal in the court of Moshe Rabbeinu, and he won.
Who won?
No. Shlomiel ben Suri Shaddai won. He said, you can't kill, every judge in Israel will kill 2 people. Okay? Divide 157,200 and they'll tell you how many judges there were. Every judge, Hirgu Ish Anashah, 2 people each. That way we're going to get a job done. 40% of Klal Yisrael will be exterminated right on the spot. That's the law that Hashem told me to do. They said, 1 second. Moshe, you're doing this as a judicial trial. Well, Yesh li l'lamed alav zchus. I want to come, like they say in every judicial trial, Misas Bezdin, somebody can come and say a testimony that will be the defense for this. So every victim, everyone who married a woman from Midian, they say, well, he has to die because he was Mizana. He said, what do you mean? We said, what do you mean? He wants to marry her. And like a Fas Toar or whatever. And you did it, so what do you want from him? That's a great defense. It was a winning argument. But everybody knew it was wrong. Because they cried. Chazal tell us they cried because Moshe Rabbeinu was morally clear enough to stand up to Paro, to stand up to the most wicked and most insidious contortionists of language and idea that could make you crazy. And ask yourself, what's right and what's wrong? I really don't know. Yesterday I saw a picture of one of my least favorite people, Bernie Sanders. And he's smiling like a nice Jew. And around him are a bunch of young Jewish people, and then he was holding a sign, and it said, he was in the center, and there were arrows pointing out to everybody around him. It says, Jews against the occupation.
Whoa.
This is the insidiousness. Your occupiers, your settlers. Moshe had the moral clarity to stand up against Paro and say, no, you're morally wrong. what you're doing is wrong, and Hashem doesn't support it. And Moshe didn't have the clarity, the Kodesh Hashem clarity, to do to Shlumiel what Pinchas did. Only Pinchas said, I remember what you told me, that the right thing to do here is, and it's a halacha, is Kanoim Pogibam. And that one day. But the court of Moshe Rabbeinu was humiliated. The rule of law of Torah was humiliated. And that's why I believe they had to bring Bilam back to the court of Moshe Rabbeinu and be judged so that Moshe should do one last judgment to correct that pagam in the court of law. That's my thought. That's why they had to bring him back there, because the damage was done to Moshe's law. And if you're going to damage the law of Moshe, there's not going to be a lot of success carrying it over into Eretz Yisrael. And that's why Hashem says to Moshe, I want you to have Milchemes Midyan, including the Nekama of Bilam, and then you're finished. Then Yeshua can take over from here. Because the Mosaic law was breached because of Bilam's twisted thing that caused Shlumiel to come up with this legal device. It ruptured the moral clarity of halacha, and it had to be restored by a Pinchas. You understand? But we didn't finish the business. We bring him back to the court and strengthen the court of Moshe, so that now everything is good and we can move forward.
Rabbi Schwartz, how could they claim that this was a legitimate marriage when there was idol worship going on too?
That the answer is, so they don't do it. It was like a taiva. They don't mean idol worship. They didn't mean it. We can't put somebody to death for something that he doesn't really believe in. They're going to marry them now, and I'm going to do what I do. Zimri made up a big tent in front of the whole tribe and made chuppah kedushin. First Gerus, of course. He didn't say we're going to do Avodah Zarah together, me and Cosby. We're not going to Vegas for our honeymoon. We're going to Mount Mahar Sinai.
I don't understand why Moshe got angry about what was going on in terms of the killing.
So what do you see? Moshe got angry because he expected them to understand by themselves, right, that any little bit of this pagam, of this sullying that went on because of the Benos Midian has to be removed. He wanted purification, which is why he spent the rest of the parsha telling them, this is how you kasha this, and this is how you kasha that, and this is how you kasha this. You can kasha the rest of Midian. Not all Midian was bad, right? Yisrael wasn't so bad. Zipporah wasn't so bad. The wife of Elazar Cohen wasn't so bad. There's some good here in Midian. It's not a Molech. It's not a Molech. It's not quite a Molech. It's something that we can save. We can save their belongings, and a person's belongings are an extension of them. Okay?
What made Achan take you?
So wait. I wanted to finish the point. So therefore, Moshe just assumed that they would have figured out that any mature woman would have been killed. The truth is, it wasn't so easy because they needed the tip. Okay? But more importantly, here's what I would like to suggest, and I'll answer your question. This is a pshat, I'll just say it as possible. Every pshat is possible. Or Chaim HaKadosh says you can say any pshat you want as long as you don't change the law. Okay? So you got a free pass. Why did they really kill those little girls? You know? 5-year-old girl, she didn't do anything wrong. What does she know? The answer is this, I believe. But their parents and their leaders and their kings' intention for them was to participate. If you could participate, we want to kill all the Jews. All hands on deck. Any woman who can take down a Jewish man, go for it. And when you say 3-year-olds in those times, they're not the 3-year-olds in our day. And Rivka was 3 years old when she got married, okay? So we're talking about a different level of maturity. They were mature. But the other part of that is, who says there wasn't a thought to be with those people? You have to understand is that they went into the most lewd and dangerous of worlds. And they had to conquer their thoughts. And that's why they took a neder. And who's to say that they were so perfect? And you know why they weren't so perfect? It's the The Torah tells us that they brought achatas for their averos when they came back from the war. What did they do wrong? They did anything wrong? They had hirurim, they had thoughts of doing wrong. They might have killed those women, but some of those women were appealing to them. And I say, therefore, that's why they couldn't kill everybody. Because they themselves didn't have perfect clarity, and that's why they needed incense. Get it? It did wear them down just a little bit. Not enough, okay? That's my thesis. In any case, let's go back to, I'm gonna have to leave the Chodesh Av and Chodesh Tammuz for next time. Okay, that's gonna be like a separate shiur.
When have you class?
Next week is not the week of I will give class including the Monday after Tisha B'Av. The next day after Tisha B'Av, I'll give a shiur, and I'm speaking at H Kodesh at the end of Tisha B'Av. If you end up there from
It's going to be an H Kodesh class?
No. If Mrs. Wellens will allow, we'll meet here the day after Tisha B'Av, and then I'll be on a 3-week break. But I'm going to that. But just a thought about the Rav HaKolel. The Rav HaKolel, like these warriors, came into a Treifa Medina. The reality is that the first Jews that came to America, not from South America, by the way, Sephardim came from South America in 1654. They had already, because they were refugees from Spain, and they were living in Brazil, and they were, in fact, if you are a Jew who ended up in Brazil after 1492, you can get an EU passport. Did you know that?
You can get
They say anybody who was exiled from Spain, so they say the following countries, any Jew from these countries can automatically get Portuguese citizenship. And they include Brazil. They're like, what are they including Brazil for? Because tons of them went to Brazil. Recife, I'm talking about in 1492 they went, they started already. Those Jews came to New York first, but they started the Shevet Israel Synagogue, which is still today. Rav Soloveitchik, still today. But the European Jews only began to come in the early 1820s, 2030, 40, the same time of the rise of Reform Jews. And in fact, the worst Reform rabbi of all time, Isaac Mayer Wise, Yimach Shemo, Shemos Rishoyim Yirko, and his partner, Max Lilienthal. You ever hear of Max Lilienthal? Max Lilienthal was in cahoots with the Tsar to modernize, which means to secularize all Russian Jews. And that's why Jews left in droves. Kind of did this a favor. And he ended up together with Isaac Mayer Wise as his crony. Why? He was thrown out of Europe. People didn't want to hear his nonsense. The Rabbanim, they threw him out. Get out of here. So he ends up in Cincinnati with this guy, and they start printing the Israelite, which was the Reform enemy, and they destroyed kilos en masse that he brought under his influence. He tricked them like Lovin, like a mullet with Bilam. They didn't know. They were told this is what's moral, this is what's good, we're in a new country, blah, blah, blah. He didn't advocate, he was against bris milah. He was against kashrus. Certainly against Shabbos. No mitzvahs of the Torah. So what is it to be Jewish? And that hasn't ended. But when the Jews started coming, who were really from it, the first wave that came was Germany, Austria. They were very simple people. Most Germans were farmers. They were a little bit. Later, they lived in Berlin. But that was 100 years later. 100 years later. But they lived in this little shtetl on the countryside. And they milked cows. And they were very formal. The word from comes from there. They were Pashut people. They followed the law. Germans. Yekkes. You do what you're told. They didn't know any better. They were decimated. And he founded the, But the next wave came out of Russia and Kiev in Ukraine. Why? Because crazy Tsar tormented them, starved them in the Pale of Settlement, made their life miserable, pogroms. And I said, let's get out of here. If the America will take us, we'll go. The numbers are astounding. There were only 3,000 Jewish families in all of the United States prior to the Civil War. And afterwards, from 1880 30 years, until 1910, 1914, 3 million Jews came to America. 3 million.
But they were not part of the reform.
But the reform destroyed most of them. And what didn't destroy, the reform didn't destroy them, America did. America did. Because they had to work on Shabbos, make a living.
We don't need,
They went,
we have to be like everybody else.
many pairs of tefillin went overboard before they got to Ellis Island. Many. They said, we want to make money, and little did they know,
Literally.
the first generation, they didn't know, and this is all in this book, they didn't know that they're going to end up in horrible tenements and work in the sweatshops, and be forced to work on Shabbos, and a handful of good people would be willing to be fired and go from one week to the next to a different job. But, here's the good news. The Jews that were Shomer Shabbos couldn't work in the sweatshops. And what used to happen is the Jews worked themselves up in the sweatshops. They learned how to do it, and they opened Jewish sweatshops. And that's how they got into the Shmata business. But they weren't Shomer Shabbos. They had lost their Shomer Shabbos along the way. But the Jews who were Shomer Shabbos could only be peddlers, because they could make their own hours. Or glass installers, because they could make their own hours. Those peddlers became all of the stores from the Lower East Side through Manhattan. There was one boy who wrote an article and says the Jews have completely invaded. There's not one non-Jewish storefront from the Lower East Side up to Lower Manhattan. And you know, those became all the stores, Gimbel's, Macy's, and Lord and Taylor. So somebody said that's why it's called Lord and Taylor, because he said, I want to be Hashem, I used to be a tailor, and now I'm going to go sell clothes.
Wasn't A&S also?
That was a joke. What?
A&S also.
A&S, Abraham Strauss, S. Klein on the square, you name it. Because they were Shomer Shabbos, they were forced into situations which were much more successful. Which, by the way, the Jews of 1820 came with a Yiddish cup. It was wide open business. They imported stuff from all over the world. They became rich immediately. Immediately. The German and Austrian Jews were exceedingly wealthy. It was like a cakewalk. Later, we went to the sweatshop. It was hard. But when Rabbi Yaacov Yosef came to New York, it was 1888, when already a critical mass of people had come who were interested in being Shomer Torah mitzvos. It's just that the environment wasn't great, and there was no leadership. And I want to spend 5 minutes to talk to you about the Rabbi Kolo. Can we stay 5 more minutes? I'm very sorry. I'm asking Simone, Mechila, but Lilias Nishmas Rabbi Yaacov Yosef. With Satmar Rebbe said, anybody goes to his grave to daven, it's in Cypress Hills, right across from Mount Hebron, where my Rebbe was buried, and many other Gedolim. Will have Yeshuas. He was a great tzaddik, and he suffered immensely. I can't even begin to tell you how he suffered, but let's give it 5 minutes. He was brought in by Igud Kahilos. They looked for the best rabbi for them. He was a brilliant Talmud Chacham, knew halacha. He was a gadol in halacha. But he's also a gadol in Jewish, in Milos and town. And here's the thing. For whatever reason, he had fallen into a great debt. And that compelled him to take the job, to come to America. Very interesting. Had he been a little bit more economically solvent, it shows you the gold in Medina was his undoing. Money was his undoing. I'll show you how. He comes to America, he says the kashrut is not acceptable. So what he does is he says, we're going to put a tax on all the chickens. Penny tax, so that we'll pay mashgichim. We'll put on plumbers, so we'll know. But you don't know more plumbers anymore, right? Are you seeing any plumbers anymore? No, because those days to throw in a not kosher chicken to a kosher chicken, how would you know any difference? So they put on the plumbers, but of course they got fake plumbers and put those on also. But there was a rebellion, she'ein kamo. And once the butchers rebelled, the reform and conservatives started saying, "You're taking us back to the Middle Ages. You're so archaic," and they would send around wagons on Shabbos in front of his shul with young people smoking and carrying on and making out and all that. And they had Yom Kippur balls where they had the young people, fathers saying Kol Nidre, and the young people are saying, "This is America, we don't need any of this," and they would eat treif on Yom Kippur in ballrooms, and there were many of them. So and then within, a lot of rabbis came who weren't Lithuanian. He was from Lithuania, from the real intellectual Gedolei Torah. People came from Galicia and other places which were more Hasidish. They go, He's Nisha Haimisha. He's Nisha Haimisha. He's not ours. We want Lamach. And they pointed themselves chief rabbis, and it became so bad, the machlokas against him, that everything fell apart. Okay? And they took away his salary, and they took away his apartment. Okay, well, I'll give you that in a second. What broke the straw for him was that a butcher who had one of his signs of Hechsher on hung a pig outside. Rabbi Yaakov Yosef walked by this store, which had somehow ostensibly his Hechsher, and he was so humiliated by seeing pork hanging outside the window by some of these brazen people, and it was an utter rebellion against Torah authority. He had a stroke. He had a stroke, and he never recovered from that stroke. And because he wasn't able to go to shul and give drushos, the wonderful Balabatim threw him out of his apartment, moved him to a quote-unquote cheaper apartment because he's not working for us, he's not teaching, so why should we pay him? Okay? And they lived in utter poverty with his son and his two daughters till the end of his life. Just a couple of faithful people with him. But it was now. What happened? At the same time, there was a silver lining. I'm going to explain how it was. His suffering gave birth to Torah in America. Okay. Yeah? Okay. His suffering gave birth to how? On the very day of his passing, the solid Torah rabbis who were in the Northeast had gathered together because there was no longer, Yaakov Yosef was no longer active. He had a stroke. He couldn't talk. He got up in his shul right after the stroke and tried to give a Shabbos Shiur drasha. He was known as Rabbi Yankel Harif. He was so brilliant. And he got up and said, Zok the Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva, blank. Zok the Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva, blank. Couldn't say it. And he said, look at me. Look what is a man. I used to be called Yankel Harif. Now I don't even remember a word in the Rambam. He says, take Musar to yourselves and do Tshuva. And walk. And when that was happening, there was nobody to ask shilos to, coming in from Omaha, from Shochtim, and all over. So the rabbis who were strong in Torah gathered together and created Agudas HaRabbanim, which still exists today. And they were very impressive. They put together a very impressive committee. Where were these rabbis from? They were from Cincinnati and St. Louis and Massachusetts and, not so much in Jersey, but that's what there was. That's where Torah communities were. A little bit in Chicago, not much. And certainly nothing further west. But they gathered together in New York to have their first conference. And the day of the conference, Rabbi Yaakov Yosef died. So they postponed the conference, and they each were there to attend his funeral. And they took upon themselves the mantle of leadership, and they were there to say Hespedim for him and to leave him. And what happened? The Jews of New York, en masse, were embarrassed and shamed at what they had done. The rabbi came in 1888, had a stroke somewhere around the turn of the century, and he died in 1902. And they all knew, it was fresh for them, it was in their generation, it was a mass tshuva. People who were his enemies, people who had abandoned Shabbos and mitzvos, came to Levaya, and I will show you that they have all the pages of the New York Times reports about his funeral. Get this funeral, 1 second. And how many people were there? It seems that there must have been 300,000 people at least at his funeral of New York. And that was pretty much every Jew in New York, and at that time. And everybody did tshuva. They were crying. There was hysterical crying outside his door and saying, tshuva, the Rabbi Gola, we lost our Rabbi, we lost our Rabbi. Not the end of the story. So the funeral processions those days had to get from Queens, from Lower Manhattan to Queens. You couldn't do that except by ferry, because there was no bridge other than the Brooklyn Bridge. Okay, there was no Verrazano, no nothing. So you couldn't get there except for ferry. And when you got off the ferry and went to the cemeteries in Queens, there was a notorious anti-Semitic factory named the Hoe Company. Look it up, H-O-E. I don't know what they made, but they made a lot of trouble. They were mostly Ukrainian immigrants, and every Jewish funeral that went off the ferry, they would taunt, they would throw projectiles at, and they would, scream insults, and every funeral was like that. The leaders of the Jewish community already knew that they're going to make trouble, and they asked for a police detail, which they were flatly refused, because the police were anti-Semitic, terribly anti-Semitic, and they were German. The head was Kraus. They couldn't care less about the Jews. They frantically came down to the Lower East Side because 300,000 people came instead of 20,000. You understand? They were forced to come down. So they said, escort us over, send the detail. The whole company was ready for them with burning water, filthy boiling water, metal projectiles, clubs, whatever. And they were raining it down. About 20,000 people did cross with the crossed on the ferry or meet on the other side. Those 20,000 people were attacked, mortally attacked. People were falling like flies. So they called the police, and what did the police do?
Nothing.
Club the Sheenies. It was a Yiddish headline afterwards. They cracked the skulls of all the Jews and did nothing to the employees. Nothing. In fact, the employees came down and helped the police beat the Jews. One guy had his skull cracked in half. It's a miracle nobody died. Many injuries from scalding boiling water and from projectiles and metal and whatever else. So much so that after they completed the burial and all those Rabbanim, there were 40 Hespedim in the cemetery, 40 Rabbanim. There was a real resurgence of Torah because of his death and the shame that they felt about what they had done to their chief rabbi. But what about the whole company? There was a commission that was appointed, and of course they exonerated the whole company because they never interviewed any Jews. They only interviewed the workers, and the workers said, like Amalek, like Bilam, the Jews attacked us. Because it is true that they broke some windows in response, but they didn't start it. So they said, what do you mean? We're the victims. They're the aggressors. But Hashem had his day. 2 years later, in 1904, the whole company decided to take a company trip on a boat in the right outside, Brooklyn. A few minutes off, they were offshore for a few minutes, and it caught fire. And every single employee died in the fire. Was roasted to it. And even the Goyish papers in that day said this was divine retribution. Now, the death of Rabbi Yaacov Yosef caused many things. One, his suffering and his shame was tshuva to America, that he couldn't have done had he lived out his life. Right? And second of all, his absence at a premature age galvanized the rabbis in America, and Torah began to be born. In the very next year, all for the boss, right? You know who that is, Yaakov Yosef Herman, and his father-in-law, Rabbi Andron, who was the founders of the Yaakov Yosef Yeshiva, 1 year after his death in 1903.
So they both
buried.
called Yaakov Yosef.
It was the second yeshiva in New York. The first yeshiva was Eitz Chaim, founded by the chief rabbi, which became Yeshiva University. And ended up moving uptown. So the first two yeshivas were Yaakov Yosef and NYU, one founded by the chief rabbi, one inspired by the death of the chief rabbi. So did he really, and then